Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCullum, and I'm here today in the firearms collection of the French National Forensic Police Department, taking a look at some of the interesting small arms that they have in their reference collection. And today we have two examples of Sola submachine guns. This is a submachine gun manufactured in Luxembourg in the 1950s, and it is one where most of the documentation you find is a very simple story of they made a gun, no one bought it, and then they went out of business. But the real story is so much more interesting. It is a tale of Cold War arms smuggling intrigue, and frankly, I think it's fascinating. So, the two versions of this gun are called the Sola Super and the Sola Leger, or light. And most of the literature, again, the standard literature on this subject will say that Sola manufactured the supers, the more complicated, fancy gun. Nobody bought them, and so they transitioned to making a much simpler, cheaper version, and then nobody bought it, and so then they went out of business. And that makes sense, but it's not really supported by a lot of the evidence. It appears that both guns were probably being made simultaneously, but I can't be entirely sure of it. So what we do know for sure, the background on this, is the company was originally founded by a guy named Nicolas Scholer and his family. They owned some other businesses in Luxembourg, and they wanted to expand and diversify. And in the early mid-1950s, getting into the arms business seemed like a potentially good way to add some diversification to an industrial concern. So they set about designing some guns. And the first thing that they did was actually get 200 Sten guns from the Luxembourg government and design a new lower assembly for them with a pistol grip and a collapsing stock that frankly doesn't really look much better to me than the original Sten gun design. There was no Luxembourg military interest in these. It was called the Sola Sten and didn't really go anywhere. So okay, that plan falls apart. What else do we do? Well, let's just build a brand new gun. And so they ended up kind of taking a lot of design elements from the Belgian Vigneron of roughly this same time period, made it into their own gun, which is, as you can see here, and as we'll take a closer look at in a moment, really a pretty good, typical 1950s, inexpensive, largely stamped sheet metal submachine gun. It appears to be a fully functional gun. Everything looks good. It's simple but effective. It's remarkably small in number of parts. The Sola Super only has 38 parts in it, including pins and springs, which is pretty good and effective. But again, you have this continuing issue of this is a world kind of awash in surplus guns like Sten guns. There are a lot of cheap submachine guns out there. All the major countries are making their own guns domestically. The smaller countries have access to surplus, and it's a difficult market to try to break into. And Sola was unable to make any progress. They couldn't find anybody who was actually interested in paying them money to get cheap 9mm submachine guns like this. So at some point, they do switch over to the Sola Leger, the light model, which is even simpler than the Sola Super. You'll see up close, like both of these look pretty good. This is definitely the more economical, simplified version. This has some neat features on it, but neither of these are able to really sell. However, that doesn't mean they're not getting some attention. They specifically get the attention of a guy named Georg Pucher, who was Latvian. He was ex-Kriegsmarine. He'd been in the Kriegsmarine during World War II, and he appears to have been a Soviet agent after the war. And what he definitely was involved in major arms trafficking to the FLN. That's the rebel movement in Algeria that is busy fighting the French army at this point in time. Well, he sees Sola as an opportunity to make some more sales and connections. So he hires an actress to go and seduce one of the company executives. It's not clear exactly who, but get into their confidence, and she convinces them, probably with Pucher's direction and assistance, to start claiming guns being defective and saying that, like, we have a bunch of these guns that we made, but they're defective, so we're just going to destroy them and take them off of our official firearms licensing book, having destroyed them. When in reality, the guns were not being destroyed. They were being put into the back of this lady's car, driven across the border into Germany, then driven over to Brussels, where they were then loaded on aircraft and flown to Morocco, from whence they went to the FLN in Algeria. And this plan actually worked pretty well. It appears I mean, Sola was in this very tight position of having spent a lot of money to tool up and make a lot of guns, but having no one interested in buying them. But here, well, we can make some sales to the FLN. It's the only actual paying customer that Sola actually had. And the plan worked until in Brussels, loading guns, one of the guys doing the packing accidentally drops a box that's marked spare engine parts in front of a security guard. The box hits the ground, breaks open, and submachine guns fall out of it. And that's a very awkward position. There's a significant diplomatic kerfuffle between the Belgians, the French, and the Luxembourg authorities. Luxembourg police go raid the factory. They arrest Nicolas Scholer, who's executive of the company. They confiscate all of the guns that he has and revoke his firearms manufacturing license, obviously, and fine him like 3,000 Luxembourg franc. And that's it. Actually, it doesn't appear to be that severe of a punishment. But they do destroy all the rest of the guns that he has, which at the time was like 760 of the Sola Supers, 1,500 of the Sola Legers, and another 2,350 of the two guns in partial construction, and under construction. So there were a lot of guns, 4,000 plus guns total, still at the factory at that point. The Luxembourg police, by the way, kept 50 of them for study, and those, a bunch of them at least, still remain in various Luxembourg government collections. But the rest are guns that came back from Algeria, like these two. So let's take a closer look at what the Sola submachine guns actually were. Let's begin here by taking a look at the Sola Super model, also sometimes called the standard model. Now, this looks an awful lot like an MP40 magazine, but in fitting with their design inheritance from the Vigneron, these use Belgian Vigneron magazines, which look almost identical to MP40 mags, but awkwardly and unhelpfully are not interchangeable with MP40 mags. So both versions of Sola use these. There are no manufacturer's markings on this gun at all. The only thing that we have is a serial number here on the back. This is D308, and I have no idea what the serial number range on these was. Now, looking at the features from one end to the other, the barrel has a permanently affixed 2-port muzzle brake on it. Kind of nice. Got a big square front post sight there. Moving back, we have an ejection port cover. So this has a little spring-loaded button here, and as long as that cover is closed, the bolt is locked in place and can't open, so that's one of the safety devices, kind of like a grease gun in that way. And you can see it's actually this stamped element right here that locks into this open area in the bolt behind that lug, prevents the bolt from moving back. Sling swivel in the front, magazine well right here. That is your magazine release button. The rear sight is a 2-position aperture, so we have a 50 and a 150 meter set of sights. 2 ambidextrous sling bars on the back for whichever side you want to put the sling on. Charging handle is non-reciprocating and just attached to the left side of the gun. Both of these are simple open bolt guns. 9mm parabellum, no locking system. This is a selective fire design, so we have a 3-position safety. R is répétition, or full auto. C is coupe par coupe, or shot by shot, semi-auto, and S for safe. And then a collapsing wire stock. And you can see with the stock pushed all the way forward, it's a little awkward, but you can actually grasp the gun around the stock and use it with the stock collapsed, although again, awkward, not super comfortable. Then you can pull the stock out and it will lock in place like that. So moving on to some quick disassembly here. We just have end caps screwed onto both the front and back of the receiver, actually. Take that end cap off. Bolt comes out, fairly stem-like. These extra cuts are for that locking system on the ejection port cover, but other than that, fixed firing pin simple blowback submachine gun. With that off, I can actually drop this stamped lower assembly off of the tube upper receiver. We've got our ejector here, fire control, sear right there. So this is in semi-auto. We'll drop the sear and then reset it. If I switch to full auto, it just drops the sear. This is your stock locking button. And frankly, that's pretty much all there is to it. Pretty simple. Molded plastic pistol grip, which is a little fancy, and Sola with a lion on the grip. I should have mentioned that earlier. There are no stampings on the gun itself with a name, but you do have that molded into the grips. Now with the receiver, we can unscrew this. This is just the barrel nut. Once that's unlocked, we have a relatively long barrel. That's 300 millimeters or roughly 12 inches long. Some cooling fins back here, which would actually be inside the receiver, which is a little unusual. And we do have the serial number repeated there on the barrel. And then the receiver itself is a piece of seamless steel tubing with a bunch of cutouts for all the relevant stuff that has to attach to it. It's magazine well, ejector, the trigger elements, all those sorts of things go in there. So there is the Sola Super. Now let's switch over to the Sola Leger. This guy is the same basic idea. Again, open bolt 9mm parabellum, simple blowback, uses Vigneron magazines, so 32 round capacity. But everything has been dramatically simplified. So the barrel is shorter, the muzzle brake is gone, the front sight is now mounted on the receiver instead of on the end of the barrel. We have the same sort of barrel nut system here. Magazine well, a little simpler. Instead of having a separated upper and lower assembly, now there's again a cylindrical tube, seamless steel tubing receiver, but the other elements are welded directly to it. So magazine well up there, the selector or the grip assembly back here. It does still have a fire selector, so now it's this rotating control. We have one for semi, zero, sorry, up there for safe, and 2 for full auto. That's not a burst, it is just full auto. Stamped pistol grip instead of the molded plastic one. The stock is the same basic system, but not interchangeable. You can see the difference in design there between the original Sola Super stocks and the Sola Leger. Push the release button in. This has a locking position out here. It actually has 2 for 2 different lengths of pull. Once again, the only marking we have on here is a serial number. This is A0044, and that number is repeated on the barrel, although the barrel is mismatched and is number 42. Unscrew the receiver end cap for disassembly. It again has this little retaining plate inside. Now on this one, the bolt handle is connected directly into the bolt and reciprocates, unlike the external charging handle of the Sola Super. So once I have the bolt all the way back, I pull the little handle out, and then the bolt comes out. This is same basic system, very similar to a Sten gun bolt or a Vigneron bolt. Notice that there is no extra cutout up here, like on the Super Bolt, because there is no receiver, there is no ejection port cover. There's our ejection port. It's just wide open, so there's no safety mechanism built into it. In fact, this has no safety mechanism to prevent the bolt from bouncing open if you drop the gun. So kind of like an early unmodified Sten or some other simpler submachine gun designs, you drop this thing on the buttstock. If there's a loaded magazine in it, the bolt can bounce open enough to pick up a cartridge and then slam it into the chamber and fire it. The Sola Super has that mechanism to prevent that from happening. The Sola Leger does not. Now we can pull off the barrel. Again, barrel nut comes off, and then the barrel just has an indexing pin right there. Again, we have a couple of sort of cooling fins on the back end of the barrel, but otherwise it's shorter and it's simpler. This is our leftover receiver. The fire control group is all welded up into the receiver. So if something goes wrong with this fire control group, there's not really much you can do short of cutting the gun apart and then having to re-weld it when you're done. And also note that the rear sight has been replaced with a single rear V-notch and this very simple just folded sheet metal front post. And there is the Sola Leger, again, disassembled. So substantially fewer parts, simpler construction, cheaper to make, but fundamentally kind of just works the same. And while the Super would probably be the nicer gun to shoot, both of these are going to function pretty well interchangeably. All right, so we left off with the president of Sola being arrested for arms smuggling, and this was in January of 1957. He gets fined, they shut the company down, but they don't really punish him all that much. And lo and behold, 2 years later, he ends up getting arrested again by the Luxembourg authorities for having illegal possession of small arms, specifically 2,000 submachine guns. It seems like he continued with making use of those smuggling contacts. That second time, he didn't have an actual license to manufacture guns, so they didn't cancel it. Instead, they just fined him again and let him go, apparently. I guess arms smuggling in Luxembourg wasn't that big of a deal at the time. Now, as for Georg Pucher, the Latvian ex-Kriegsmarine Soviet smuggling agent who set this whole thing up, he met a bit of a darker fate. In March of 1959, he was killed by a car bomb in Frankfurt, probably by the Red Hand, which was a terrorist network. Well, actually, it was a fake terrorist network that was run by French intelligence that technically, formally doesn't exist, but kind of common knowledge that this is an organization that French intelligence used as a front to get rid of people that they needed gotten rid of, namely, among others, people smuggling arms to the FLN in Algeria. So Pucher meets his end in 1959 in an explosion, and that's pretty much the end of the Sola story. Of course, when the company was shut down and all of its guns were confiscated in ~57, that was the end of them selling guns. They never rebuilt it. And there never were any paying customers for these on the legitimate market. You will see rumors in some documentation about a South American country adopting these. I have not found any specifics, and I suspect that is a rumor made up to try and justify where the guns actually went by someone who didn't know that they were all being smuggled into Africa. The total quantity that went to the FLN is also very unclear. I saw one number suggesting about 1,000, but without any sort of source or reference, so that may be a legit number, it may be off, we just don't know. However, it was a non-trivial number of these guns that went to the Algerians. So anyway, I'd like to give a big thanks to the French police for giving me access to these two out of their collection to show to you guys. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.